I stood there, my fingers gripping the empty pill bottle, the cold realization sinking in as my daughter's voice echoed from upstairs. It's cheaper if she's gone. Derek's careless words still fresh in my ears. After everything I'd given her, years of sacrifice, a life built for her, this was my reward. Betrayal. So I did what she never expected. I didn't wait for her to take it all. I took control and watched her world crumble. We're about to begin, but if you'd like, share where you're joining from. It reminds me this story doesn't echo into silence, it lands somewhere real. Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. Nora Whitfield stood in her kitchen, sunlight painting soft stripes through the lace curtains, holding her amber prescription bottle upside down. Nothing, not a single pill. Her fingers trembled, not with panic, but with calculation. She had refilled it 6 days ago. 30 tablets, her daily heart medication. She closed the bottle slowly and slid it into the drawer beneath the toaster, where the rest of her medicines were alphabetized like files in an accountant's cabinet. She never misplaced a thing. Ever. Down the hallway, muffled voices filtered through the vent. Nora tilted her head. The register above the pantry carried sound from the upstairs guest room. Clara's voice, sharp, impatient. Look, I'm just saying. She's slowing down. A pause. Then Derek's voice, smug and careless. Cheaper if she's gone, babe. That trust kicks in the minute she croaks. Nora's heart knocked once, then twice. Too hard. She pressed her hand to her chest and stepped back from the drawer like it might explode. For a long moment she just stood there, staring at the cracked tile near the sink. She'd meant to fix that chip for years. She didn't cry. Nora Whitfield didn't weep when the ledger didn't balance. She found the error and fixed it. Footsteps thundered down the stairs. She moved quickly to the fridge, pretending to dig for something. Clara appeared, glossy hair pulled tight, sunglasses on through the morning was overcast. Going out, she muttered, grabbing her purse from the counter. Will you be back for dinner? Nora asked without turning. Clara shrugged. Depends. Derek wants to stop by the dealership. The front door slammed behind her before Nora could reply. She stayed bent over the fridge longer than necessary. Her knees ached when she stood straight again. A voice broke the silence. Grandma. Emma stood in the archway, wearing that worried wrinkle between her brows again, the one that hadn't left since Christmas. She was dressed in leggings and a hoodie, hair in a messy bun, textbooks pressed to her chest. You okay? You look kinda pale. Nora nodded too quickly. Just forgot where I put the creamer? Emma crossed the room and gently took the carton from the shelf. It's always on the left, behind the salsa. Like, always? Nora managed a small smile. So it is. She took the carton, set it on the counter, and reached for the mug she'd already forgotten she'd filled. Her hand missed by inches. Emma caught it. You're shaking. Not enough sleep, Nora lied. Nothing more. Emma's eyes lingered on her for a second longer than comfortable, but she didn't push. The sound of a car pulling into the gravel driveway broke the moment. Ruth Carter entered without knocking, as she always did, balancing 2 brown paper bags in her arms. Brought you the good peaches and those oat crackers you like, she said, setting the bags on the kitchen island. Her sharp eyes scanned the room. You look like hell, Nora. Thank you, Ruth, Nora said dryly. Ruth's gaze flicked to Emma, then back to Nora. She took a slow step forward. What happened? Nora waited until Emma wandered to the back porch, pulling out her phone. She opened the drawer below the toaster and silently held up the empty pill bottle. Then, just as silently, she dropped it back in. They're counting my days, she whispered, like dollars in a ledger. Ruth didn't speak for a moment. She stared at her friend with a mix of fury and clarity, like a storm calculating which way to break. Then make their math a nightmare, she said. Nora didn't smile. She picked up her tea and took a slow, measured sip. Outside, Clara's car was gone, but the echo of her voice, of Derek's words, still lingered like the aftertaste of bitterness too old to swallow. From the porch, Emma looked up from her phone. Grandma, did you change your password for the security app? I couldn't get in to check the camera feed. Nora's breath hitched. She hadn't. She hadn't changed a thing. By the time twilight settled over the Blue Ridge horizon, Nora was seated in her study, wrapped in the quiet that always came after too much pretending. The overhead light hummed faintly, casting a warm cone over the desk where her hands, though steady, felt heavier than usual. The envelope she had pulled from the cedar cabinet hours earlier now lay open before her, its contents fanned out like relics from a war she hadn't realized she'd been fighting for years. Her trust papers were still crisp, unbent at the corners, as if untouched by the heat of betrayal. Across the top margin, her own signature stared back at her. Neat, intentional, absolute. She read through it slowly, line by line, the way she used to review tax forms for clients during her years as an accountant. Clara Whitfield, primary beneficiary. Derek Whitfield, contingent. No mention of Emma. No stipulation for behavior. No trigger clauses. No guardrails. Just blind trust. Nora removed her glasses, pinching the bridge of her nose. The document felt like a mistaken pen, one she'd failed to audit until now. She reached for her personal ledger, a worn red leather book, lined with cream pages and ruled with a precision most people would find obsessive. But to Nora, it was peace, clarity, control. She flipped past the household expenses, past the records of HVAC maintenance, appliance replacements, even the date the oak in the front yard last shed early. She turned to a tab labeled Clara, Financial History. The entries began almost 15 years back. June 2009, $2,300. Clara. Emergency dental work. Paid directly. No repayment. October 2011, $5,000. Clara and Derek. Loan for business license, roofing company. Never formalized. March 2014, $8,000. Clara. Wedding do-over. Claimed embarrassment over first one. No repayment. August 2016, $1,200. Clara. Lease on new Audi. Said she'd cover insurance. Never did. It went on. Page after page. Nora had been methodical. Dates, amounts, purposes, outcome. Some entries ended with small notes in the margin. Said she'd pay after tax return. Derek never followed up. Asked not to tell Emma. Nora stared at the last page. The total amount loaned to Clara, unreturned, unacknowledged, stood at $63,750. She didn't feel angry. She felt clean. Like a truth had been scrubbed free of the mud Clara had packed around it for decades. And underneath it, the bones of her daughter's entitlement were plain. The clock on the mantel clicked to 6:45. She reached for the phone. When Paul Granger answered, his voice was calm and exact, just as she remembered. Nora, it's good to hear from you. I need to meet, quietly. I'd like to make some changes to the trust. There was no hesitation on his end. Tomorrow evening, after office hours, I'll bring the amendment packet with me. Good, she said, and hung up before doubt could sneak in. Ruth arrived 20 minutes later, summoned not by words, but by the kind of silence only best friends recognize. She carried her metal notary case under one arm and wore that same expression Nora remembered from their college days, back when Ruth would walk into a registrar's office and demand something be fixed without ever raising her voice. They sat at the kitchen table under the soft glow of a pendant light. Ruth unpacked the notary kit and uncapped a pen. You know the drill. Full name, date, clear intention. You still sure about this? I've never been more sure of anything, Nora said, already writing. I, Nora Whitfield, of sound mind and deliberate will, she began aloud, her voice clear, her hand unshaking, declare that I have not been coerced, misled, or manipulated into any decisions regarding my estate, property, or legal right. The actions I take now reflect my full knowledge and independent. She signed, and Ruth sealed the affidavit without a word. The phone buzzed. It was a text from Emma. Just overheard Mom on the phone again. She's talking about guardianship. Says she has options if you don't cooperate. I'll testify if you need me. Whatever it takes. I love you. Nora stared at the message for a long moment, her thumb hovering above the screen. Then she locked the phone, tucked it away, and looked back at Ruth. If they hide my pills, she said quietly, I'll hide their inheritance. Rain tapped lightly on the windows, the kind of late summer drizzle that blurred the edges of the porch light and made the house feel like a ship adrift. Inside, Nora sat by the fireplace, the flames low and soft, flickering just enough to warm the soles of her feet as she waited. The clock on the mantel read 9:58 p.m. She had moved like clockwork all day, shredding old papers that no longer served her, cleaning the cedar cabinet's contents with a deliberateness that wasn't about tidiness, but transition. One life folded away, another one bracing to unfold. When the doorbell rang, she didn't flinch. Ruth opened it, having stationed herself as the unofficial doorman, guardian, and bodyguard. Paul Granger stepped inside, his dark overcoat flecked with mist, briefcase in hand, shoes squeaking faintly against the hardwood. "Evening," he said with a small nod. "Thank you for keeping this discreet. I find most things worth doing are better handled in silence," Nora replied as she motioned him toward the dining table. He smiled faintly at that and set his case down, flipping open the polished brass latches. From within, he pulled out a single folder, thick with tabs and flagged signatures. Legal paper, amendment forms, a pen with real weight. Nothing casual. Ruth and Emma settled in on either side of Nora, flanking her like twin anchors. Paul adjusted his reading glasses. This amendment formally removes Clara Whitfield and Derek Whitfield as beneficiaries. They are also excluded from any contingent roles. A no-contest clause has been included. Any legal challenge brought by either party will automatically void their eligibility for any remaining assets, current or future. "Good," Nora said without hesitation. "The replacement beneficiary," he continued, "is Emma Whitfield, under the structure of an irrevocable education trust. All assets will be managed under that umbrella and protected from interference." Emma sat straighter in her chair. "Wait, I thought, Grandma, you don't have to." "I know what I'm doing," Nora said softly, but without budging. "This isn't a gift, it's restoration. You've never taken from." Emma didn't argue again. She simply reached out and placed her hand lightly over Nora's. Paul laid the amendment before her, the pen resting diagonally across the first page. "Whenever you're ready." Nora glanced up at Ruth. Ruth nodded once, then pulled her notary seal from the case beside her, flipping it open with a practiced flick of her thumb. The room was still. Only the fire crackled in the background as Nora picked up the pen. Her signature moved across each marked line with clarity and force. No hesitation, no shaking. Her name bloomed in ink, where it mattered. "Initial here, and here," Paul instructed gently. Nora complied, sliding each page to Ruth once complete. Ruth notarized each one with a firm stamp, sealing every intent with law. When the final page was signed and passed forward, Paul collected the documents carefully, aligning the edges as if he were binding something sacred. "I'll have these couriered to the bank vault first thing in the morning," he said. "A record will also be filed with your estate archive and a scanned copy emailed to you tonight." "Thank you, Paul," Nora said, her voice barely above a whisper. She leaned back in her chair and closed her eyes for a moment, not in exhaustion, but in release. Ruth poured her a small glass of brandy without asking. Emma sat watching her grandmother as if seeing her through new light. "You all right?" Emma asked, quieter than usual. Nora opened her eyes slowly. "Yes, I'm more than all right." She took the glass in both hands and stared into the amber liquid. This is my oxygen." They all sat still, suspended in the quiet aftermath of action, a moment that felt both like the closing of a casket and the opening of a vault. Paul rose and collected his briefcase. "I'll walk these out the moment the courier arrives. You're protected now, legally and fully." As he stepped out into the rain, Ruth followed to lock the door behind him. Nora remained seated. Her hands were calm now. From the hallway, the sudden buzz of Emma's phone broke the silence. She frowned at the screen. "Mom's texting me, says she's stopping by tomorrow, and that we better not get clever." Nora met her granddaughter's gaze, eyes hardening just enough. "Let her come," she said. "Let her see what clever really looks like." The morning arrived shrouded in fog, the kind that clung to the hedges and smeared the mountain skyline into something uncertain. Nora sat at the kitchen table nursing her second cup of black coffee, the taste sharper than usual. The house was too quiet. Even the birds seemed to be holding their breath. She had expected Clara to show up angry, but she hadn't expected her to show up early. The front door opened without a knock. "Emma!" Clara's voice cracked like a whip through the house. "Where the hell is your phone?" Emma came in from the back patio, earbuds dangling, hoodie sleeves shoved up her arms. "It's in my pocket," she said, confused. "Why?" Clara's heels clicked like gunshots against the hardwood as she strode in, dragging Derek behind her, still in his cheap bomber jacket and scuffed boots. His expression was tight-lipped and scanning, like a man measuring exit routes even before the first punch was thrown. "What did you two do?" Clara asked, barely keeping her tone below a shout. I know something's off. I can feel it. Don't act like I'm stupid. I'm not acting, Nora said calmly, setting down her mug. But, you are raising your voice in my home. You've been acting weird, Mom. Withdrawals here and there. Paul Granger's name on the caller ID. Emma hovering like she's your nurse. Clara turned toward her daughter. You manipulating her? Emma blinked. Are you serious right now? Derek crossed his arms, smirking like a man who'd already decided how this conversation would end. Come on, Clara, it's obvious. You two are pushing her to change things. I don't push your mother, Emma said, stepping closer to Nora. I protect her. Clara's tone twisted sharper. You think you're going to walk out of this with a tuition check and a trust fund? Think again. Ruth entered from the hallway, moving slowly, her phone already out, screen glowing. Just so everyone's clear, she said without looking up. This conversation's being recorded. Continue. Derek laughed dryly. Really? That's cute. No, Ruth said, raising her eyes to meet his. That's legal. Clara's jaw tensed. Whatever you're trying to pull, Mom, undo it. I can get legal involved. Guardianship? Medical inquiry? You've been forgetful. Clara, Nora said, her voice quiet and even. Go home. It's too early in the day for threats. Clara took a step forward, finger pointed. Don't patronize me. I can smell when people are making moves behind my back. You don't smell moves, Ruth muttered. You smell fear. Derek leaned against the door frame and grinned. Don't get too comfortable. We'll see who signs last. Nora's stare snapped to him. You already did, Derek. Years ago, when you started borrowing against futures that weren't yours. That shut him up, at least for a beat. Paul's arrival broke the tension. He entered without fanfare, briefcase in hand, rain still beating on his shoulders. Apologies. Morning traffic's a beast. Clara turned on him like a cornered animal. You've been meeting with her. Changing documents. That's conflict of interest. Paul remained perfectly composed. Your mother retained me long before you were even listed on the trust. I serve her, not you. She's not of sound mind, Clara snapped. Paul's brows lifted slightly. Would you like me to bring out the results of her last 2 cognitive exams, administered under full medical protocol? Both passed. Clara's mouth opened, but no words came out. Paul set his briefcase down and pulled out a sealed folder. I came today to deliver updated legal protections. Durable power of attorney has been revoked and reassigned, effective immediately. Nora's legal autonomy is fully reinforced, and all new documents were notarized in compliance with North Carolina statute. Clara's eyes darted to Emma. You think this is a win? It's not over. Nora rose slowly from the table, smoothing her sweater as she stood. No, she said. It's just beginning. Clara stormed out first, shoving the door open so hard it hit the wall with a crack. Derek lingered behind, casting one final smug glance over his shoulder. You're gonna regret this, he said. From the corner, Ruth pressed stop on her phone recorder. We won't, she said. But you might. The glass doors of Blue Ridge Community Bank slid open with a whisper as Paul Granger stepped inside, the affidavit tucked beneath his arm like a loaded weapon. The lobby smelled of fresh carpet glue and lemon oil, the kind of sterile polish reserved for places where people signed away lifetime. He nodded at the receptionist, who recognized him immediately, and disappeared into a quiet corner office where 2 security cameras and a compliance officer would silently witness the official filing of the amended trust. By 10:17 a.m., the bank had updated its legal record. By 11:03, Clara's debit card was declined at Stonehill Garden Center. She tried again, then once more, then cursed loud enough for the cashier to take a step back. That's impossible, she hissed, jabbing her manicured finger at the machine. Run it again. The cashier gave a nervous smile. It's saying insufficient authorization. Clara stormed out without the rose bushes she'd insisted were therapeutic. Back at the house, Nora stood with Paul and Ruth at the edge of the living room as Emma read aloud from the new deed paperwork. The ink was still fresh. Effective today, Emma said, glancing up from the page. The home and property located at 203 Henley Creek Road is held in trust under my name, as assigned trustee, on behalf of Nora Whitfield. Nora nodded, her gaze fixed out the window where the sun was just starting to break through the clouds. She wasn't smiling, not exactly, but there was something in her face, a quiet finality, like a lock clicking into place. Ruth leaned toward her. You all right? I am. Nora said. For the first time in months, I am. The calm didn't last long. The screech of tires on gravel announced Clara and Derek's return before anyone saw the car. The front door flew open a moment later, and Clara's heels slammed across the floor with all the subtlety of a courtroom gavel. "What the hell did you do?" she spat, holding up her phone like it was evidence. "The card's frozen. I just tried to buy mulch and couldn't even get approval for $20. Paul remained still, hands folded, voice neutral. That joint card was tied to Nora's primary account, which is now protected under the amended trust. Your access was a courtesy, not an entitlement. "You snake," Clara hissed. "You went behind my back." "No," Nora said quietly. "I stopped letting you stand behind me." Clara's mouth opened, but Derek beat her to the next move, storming toward the dining room table where the deed sat half-folded beside the notary kit. "What is this?" he demanded. "You put the house in Emma's name?" "In trust," Paul corrected, "with full legal protections." "You can't do this," Clara screamed, her voice shrill enough to make Ruth flinch. "You think you're going to just erase me?" "I'm not erasing anyone," Nora said. "I'm just finally drawing lines where they should have been all along." Derek slammed his palm on the table hard enough to rattle the glasses. "We'll sue. You hear me? You're not getting away with this." Ruth stepped forward, not flinching an inch. "Sue all you want," she said coldly. "Just remember, when you lose, you'll be paying her lawyer's fees too." Paul had remained silent through most of the shouting, but now he slowly opened his leather portfolio. He pulled out a slim, printed document and passed it to Nora. "I didn't want to bring this into the conversation unless I had proof," he said, turning toward Clara. "But I ran a title search on your home this morning. Something didn't sit right after our last conversation." Clara blinked, suddenly still. Paul continued, voice steady. "There's a mortgage recorded 3 months ago. Not unusual, except it includes an addendum you submitted as part of the collateral evaluation." He flipped to the second page. "This," he tapped, "is a forged inheritance guarantee signed with Nora's name, claiming you were entitled to receive no less than $250,000 upon her passing." The room dropped into a vacuum of silence. Emma's face went pale. Ruth's lips parted, stunned. Nora stared at the page, not with shock, but with a kind of weary comprehension, as if the puzzle had finally revealed its last ugly corner. "That's not real," Clara said, her voice wobbling. "That's not—" Derek helped. She stopped herself too late. Derek stepped back, hands raised like he'd touched fire. "I told you not to send that," he muttered. The silence after Clara's accidental confession stretched like wet wool, heavy, clinging, impossible to shake off. Nora sat still at the dining table, her eyes fixed on the forged mortgage document, the fake signature so close to her real one it might have fooled a bank officer, but not her. Paul gently slid the page closer. "I cross-checked the original mortgage note filed with the Buncombe County Register. That document," he said, tapping it once, "was used to secure a $130,000 second loan against Clara and Derek's property. The underwriter approved it in large part because of this fabricated inheritance statement." Nora's voice came low, barely above a whisper, but as sharp as frost. "She gambled my death." Ruth sat beside her, one hand braced on the edge of the table. "Then it's time to call the dealer. Let's raise the stakes." Paul gave a grim nod. "I'm submitting this to the bank fraud unit first thing tomorrow. I'll also file a criminal complaint with the district attorney's office. They may take it straight to the white-collar division, depending on the total paper trail." Across the room, Emma's hand trembled slightly as she picked up the page and stared at the signature. How could she do this? This isn't just greedy. This is psychotic. "She's not sick," Nora said. "She's entitled. There's a difference." Ruth reached for her phone and snapped a picture of the forged addendum. "This goes in the file, multiple backups." Paul stood. "I'll handle the filings, but keep this quiet for now. If Clara realizes what's coming too early, she'll start covering her tracks." "Too late," Emma muttered, eyes narrowing at her screen. "She's already starting." She held up her phone. Clara's Facebook page, once filled with filtered brunch photos and dog memes, now displayed a fresh post, time-stamped 2 minutes ago. "Elder abuse is real. When family manipulates someone into changing their will, that's not love. It's theft. Please pray for my mom. She's not well, but she's surrounded by people who keep her isolated. Cha guardianship, cha justice." Pray form. Attached was an old photo of Nora, taken last Thanksgiving. Eyes mid-blink, sweater disheveled, caught mid-laugh in a way that stripped her of composure. The caption beneath it? She doesn't even recognize me anymore. Ruth's mouth dropped open. She posted that publicly? 300 likes already, Emma said. And 2 of them from your church group, Grandma. Nora's hands folded neatly in her lap, but her jaw flexed. She wants to control the story. Spin me into confusion before the courts see clarity. Emma's thumbs moved fast, screen glowing white-blue in her hands. I'm screenshotting everything. Timestamp, comments, shares, all of it. If she deletes it later, we'll still have a chain of evidence. She's setting up a guardianship narrative, Paul said, grim. It's what people do when they know their time's almost up. Smear the truth before it has legs. Ruth stood and walked toward the front window, parting the curtain just enough to see the street. Her car's gone, probably halfway to her lawyer's office, or the next person gullible enough to believe she's the victim. She thinks the louder she yells, the more right she becomes, Nora said. But truth doesn't need to yell. It waits. Paul packed the document back into his briefcase. If she pushes the guardianship angle publicly, she opens herself to countersuit. Libel, defamation, even malicious interference. You've passed every cognitive test I've documented. That record alone will shut down any court attempt. Nora didn't respond right away. Instead, she reached across the table and picked up the pen she'd used to sign her trust amendment. She twirled it between her fingers, then set it down again with deliberate care. Clara just started a fire she doesn't know how to put out. Emma's phone buzzed again. A new notification. She's not done, Emma said, eyes going wide. She's tagged your church friends, your book club, the HOA. She's trying to burn your entire reputation down. Nora stood slowly, her back straightening as she walked toward the kitchen drawer. She opened it and pulled out a slim black folder labeled Medical Records, Annuals. What are you doing? Ruth asked. Nora flipped the folder open and removed a sealed envelope bearing a neurologist's name, making sure the fire only spreads in one direction. The courthouse hallway smelled faintly of waxed floors and old paper, a sterile contrast to the wildfire Clara had lit online. Nora sat quietly on the bench outside courtroom 3B, a soft blue scarf draped around her shoulders, her palms folded neatly over a thin leather folder. She didn't fidget, she didn't speak. Her stillness was not resignation, it was readiness. Beside her, Ruth scrolled silently through screenshots of Clara's Facebook smear campaign. Emma sat on the other side, gripping a folder of printouts and photos, her nerves thin but steady beneath the surface. Paul stood near the double doors, checking his watch. She's late, he muttered. She wants a grand entrance, Ruth replied without looking up. All good manipulators do. The doors burst open at 9:01. Clara entered in a beige blazer and carefully selected grief. Derek followed, wearing a somber black suit he probably borrowed. Clara's face tightened when she saw them all seated together. Her eyes darted to Nora's hands, perhaps hoping to find them trembling, but Nora didn't even blink. Inside the courtroom, the bench creaked as everyone sat. The bailiff announced the case number. Judge Milton Hayes, a man with a stern mouth and kindly eyes, entered and settled in without theatrics. Petitioner, he began, looking at Clara, you're requesting temporary guardianship of your mother's person and estate. On what basis? Clara rose. Your Honor, I love my mother very much, she began, her voice overly even. But in the last 6 months, she's been increasingly confused, withdrawn, and erratic. She's fallen under the influence of others, made sudden legal changes, and I believe she's being manipulated, especially by my daughter, who is financially dependent on her. Nora didn't even look at Clara. She simply watched the judge. Clara continued, just this week, she altered her trust and transferred property. That's not the woman I grew up with. She's isolated. She forgets things. She calls people by the wrong names. I'm not doing this to control her. I'm trying to protect her. Judge Hayes nodded, writing something. Understood. Is there a physician's statement? There wasn't time to obtain one, but... I see, he said, cutting her off gently. Paul stood. May I respond, Your Honor? Go ahead. Paul moved with quiet confidence, placing a folder on the table before the bench. Included here are 2 cognitive evaluations administered in the last 8 months by Dr. Vanessa Reed, board-certified neurologist and memory specialist at Asheville Medical. Both exams show perfect cognitive function, memory retention, decision-making, and executive control. Nora Whitfield is, by all definitions, of sound mind. He turned slightly toward Clara. Your Honor, what the petitioner calls erratic behavior is, in fact, responsible legal action. Mrs. Whitfield is a victim of financial fraud, conducted by the very party seeking control of her estate. Judge Hayes raised an eyebrow. Fraud? Paul slid another document forward. Filed yesterday with the DA's office and the bank's fraud unit, a mortgage was secured using a forged inheritance statement bearing Nora's signature. Clara Whitfield was the applicant. The ink isn't even dry. Clara's face turned an impossible shade of red. That's not... You can't prove... Paul didn't respond. He didn't need to. The judge turned. Is there anyone else here to speak on Nora Whitfield's behalf? Emma stood slowly, clutching her printouts. Yes, Your Honor. I live with my grandmother. I've seen things others haven't. I've watched my mother remove medication from its bottle, move money between accounts without permission, and lie about it. I've tracked it. I've documented it. I'm willing to provide full testimony and digital proof. For the first time, Judge Hayes looked directly at Clara. Have you withheld or tampered with your mother's medication? Clara's mouth opened, and then closed again. I'm ready to rule, Judge Hayes said, already writing. Guardianship is denied outright. No further petitions will be considered without a physician's declaration and third-party psychiatric evaluation. Clara stood too quickly, knocking over her chair. This isn't over, she snapped. You're all going to regret this. Judge Hayes didn't even look up. If that's a threat, Ms. Whitfield, I suggest you sit back down. But Clara was already storming down the aisle, heels clapping against the tile. Derek hesitated, then followed her out, his expression unreadable. The door swung closed behind them. Paul exhaled. Ruth leaned back, finally smiling, but Nora just sat still, as if listening for something. Then her phone buzzed. She picked it up and read the message aloud, her voice flat. From Clara's loan officer. We've received new information and are required to report the note for internal fraud review. Expect contact from authorities. The first cruiser rolled up the gravel driveway at dusk. Its headlights flared against the porch rails, casting long shadows through the front window. Nora stood at the sink rinsing her tea mug, her shoulders square, her breath measured. Ruth opened the door before the knock came, motioning the officer inside without fanfare. He was young, polite, and efficient. Detective Brendan Harris from Buncombe County Fraud Division. He didn't sit, just stood in the foyer with his notepad, scanning documents Paul had prearranged in a neat stack on the entryway console. The forged mortgage note, the neurologist's evaluations, the notarized trust revision, and the screenshots of Clara's online smear campaign. I'm not here to interrogate, he said gently. This is a preliminary contact. Our team's initiating a formal investigation into the mortgage filing. It's early, but the documentation looks serious. Nora met his eyes. Take whatever time you need, but if this goes quiet, I won't. He gave a slight nod, then left just as quickly as he'd come. By morning, Ruth had 3 motion-activated cameras installed, one above the garage, one angled at the front porch, and one hidden in a birdhouse on the back fence. All fed to a secure cloud account Emma had encrypted herself. We'll catch her before she even touches the gate, Ruth muttered as she screwed the final lens cap into place. Nora stood nearby with a new medication lockbox, coated and stainless steel. Her pills, now tracked and logged, rested inside with a sensor that alerted her phone if tampered with. Twice a week she now visited Dr. Reed, not because she needed cognitive reassurance, but because a paper trail of vigilance spoke louder than any courtroom rant. Paul returned with fresh documents 2 days later. Restraining order was approved, he said, tapping the manila envelope against his palm. You'll have temporary protective distance, 100 feet, while we build toward a permanent injunction. If she violates it, she risks automatic felony charges. Nora nodded but didn't speak. She no longer needed to. Clara, of course, retaliated the only way she knew how, loudly. By that afternoon, her Facebook account exploded with another storm of manipulation dressed as grief. This time, she posted a photo of herself in front of Nora's house from the curb, arms folded, jaw clenched. Caption: This is what being erased looks like. I tried everything. I'm her daughter. I deserve the truth, not exile. She paired it with a dramatic video plea, tears cued perfectly, her voice breaking just enough to feel rehearsed. She doesn't remember my birthday. She thinks Ruth is her sister. They've locked me out. If I disappear, you know why. But the internet, like fire, spreads both warmth and destruction. Emma sent the posts to Paul. Ruth documented the comments, but it was the unexpected responses that changed the tone, because someone else saw them. Emma's college roommate Hannah shared the post in a group chat of mutual friends. Most of them had spent Thanksgiving with Nora. They'd eaten her pies, played Scrabble in her den, listened to her quiz Emma gently on midterms between helpings of green bean casserole. And they didn't buy the lie. Within an hour, Nora's inbox filled with messages. I'm sorry your daughter's doing this to you. We know who you are, Ms. Whitfield. We've seen it ourselves. Please don't let her dim your light. You raised a good granddaughter. That tells us everything. Nora sat at her desk and scrolled through them, one by one, glasses perched low on her nose. Some messages came from young women she barely remembered, others from neighbors. One from a woman who used to teach with Ruth and had watched Clara grow up. Each note was small, but together they formed something Nora hadn't expected, a net catching the weight of betrayal before it could sink her spirit. Ruth set a fresh cup of tea beside her and leaned down, watching her read. Well, she said softly, sunlight bleaches lies. Nora didn't look up, but a faint smile ghosted her lips. And we've finally opened the curtain. She clicked to the next message, but before she could read it, Emma rushed in from the hallway, her voice urgent. Grandma, Clara's live on Instagram. Nora turned, fully alert. What is she saying now? Emma hesitated. She's in her car, outside a building. She just said, I'm about to make them all regret pushing me this far. The courtroom was colder this time. Maybe it was the air conditioning, or maybe it was the way truth settles into a room when it's about to burn away someone's version of reality. Nora sat upright in the front row beside Ruth, her blouse ironed, her glasses polished. She wore no makeup, just the steadiness of someone who'd already mourned what needed mourning and now waited for justice to arrive in a suit and tie. Judge Hayes entered briskly, nodded to the clerk, and scanned the room. He didn't need introduction. He remembered all the players. Proceed, he said. Paul stood. Your Honor, we've subpoenaed a representative from Blue Ridge Community Bank to testify regarding a forged inheritance document submitted as part of a mortgage application by Clara Whitfield. The bank's underwriters relied on this falsified material to issue a $130,000 loan. Our witness will speak to its authenticity, or lack thereof. Clara sat at the defense table beside her attorney, a man with slicked-back hair and a face that already looked like it had aged 5 years since breakfast. Derek sat behind them, arms crossed, confidence eroding like chalk in the rain. The bank's compliance officer, a sharply dressed woman named Tanya Green, took the stand, calm, efficient, armed with facts. I reviewed the mortgage application. The inheritance guarantee submitted was unsigned by legal counsel, yet appeared to bear a signature that matched Nora Whitfield's. Upon further inspection, our forensic consultant flagged multiple red flags: ink inconsistency, mismatched date formatting, and a slight tilt in signature curvature inconsistent with Ms. Whitfield's historical records. Paul stepped forward. To clarify, did the bank consider this document genuine when approving the mortgage? Yes. At the time, the assumption was that it had been prepared informally. We now understand it was fabricated. Was there any official verification requested? Number. The loan was processed under Clara Whitfield's family confidence provision, often used for legacy assets when heirs provide assurances. Has the bank filed a fraud report with the state? Yes. As of 3 days ago. Paul turned, hands clasped behind his back. No further questions. Clara's lawyer declined to cross-examine. His face said enough. Damage control mode had begun, but Judge Hayes wasn't finished. He leaned forward. Is the author of the document in the courtroom today? Tanya looked directly at Clara. Yes. Ms. Whitfield, the judge said evenly. Do you deny authoring or submitting this letter? Clara stood slowly. Her voice was thin. It wasn't supposed to be like this. Answer the question. Clara glanced toward Derek. It was his idea, she blurted. He said the bank would never question it if we made it look real. He printed the template. I just signed it. Every head in the room turned. Derek went pale, then red. I told you not to use it, he barked. I never said send it. You handed me the pen. Paul rose again. Your Honor, we'd like to request a forensic handwriting comparison using Derek Whitfield's printed materials. Granted, the judge said. And pending results, the court will open a formal mortgage fraud investigation. Clara sank back into her chair like the air had been pulled from her lungs. Nora stood slowly from the front row. She didn't speak for the record, only loud enough for Clara and Derek to hear. You mocked my breath, she said, voice even, eyes unflinching. You counted my life like it was a payout on a policy. And yet, she gestured gently around the room. I'm still here. Clara didn't respond. She couldn't. Judge Hayes tapped his pen against the bench. Based on testimony and submitted evidence, I'm ordering a full forensic audit of all financial accounts connected to Clara and Derek Whitfield. That includes mortgage records, LLCs, credit activity, and all filings tied to family assets. Derek stood abruptly. This is a witch hunt. No, Mr. Whitfield, the judge said dryly. This is a court of law. Paul glanced at Nora with a nod. Outside, clouds gathered again, but inside, the temperature had shifted. Ruth whispered to Nora, they're unraveling. Nora didn't answer. She was already looking ahead. The conference room inside the courthouse annex was beige, windowless, and humming with the low buzz of fluorescent lights, an unassuming setting for the unraveling of an entire life's worth of deception. Nora sat between Emma and Ruth at a long oak table, her hands folded, knuckles white. Across from her, Derek shifted uncomfortably in his chair, collar loosened, jaw clenched. Clara sat 2 seats down, arms crossed so tightly her shoulders were near her ears, mascara slightly smudged at the corners like she'd been trying not to cry, and mostly failing. At the head of the table, the forensic accountant, Mrs. Valerie Locke, cleared her throat and began. We were asked to conduct a comprehensive audit of Clara and Derek Whitfield's personal and business finances, as well as any activity connected to the Whitfield family trust and properties. The scope includes the last 7 fiscal years. She paused, clicking her laptop to display the first chart on the screen behind her. In that time frame, Mr. Whitfield opened and dissolved 5 separate LLCs, 3 of which existed on paper only, with no employees, no assets, and no active revenue streams. Yet all 3 were used to apply for and receive business credit. Some secured, most not. Derek scratched at the corner of his mouth but said nothing. Valerie continued, her tone clinical but edged with disbelief. One of those LLCs, Whitfield Property Solutions, lists its business address as 203 Henley Creek Road. Nora's breath hitched, but her voice stayed even. That's my home. Yes, ma'am, Valerie said gently. It appears your property was listed as collateral in at least 2 separate loan applications totaling nearly $90,000. We're still investigating whether this was done without your consent. From the corner of her eye, Nora saw Emma stiffen. She reached under the table and gripped her granddaughter's hand, not to seek comfort, but to give it. And the tax records? Judge Hayes asked from his chair at the end of the table. 4 consecutive years of underreported income, Valerie answered. Several business deductions were falsified. One line item claims a $6,000 caregiver stipend paid to Ms. Clara Whitfield for work associated with estate management and elder care. Paul blinked. There's no such arrangement. Valerie nodded. Correct. It appears fabricated. Clara's lips parted. I thought I was allowed to. You're not allowed to falsify caregiving for someone you were trying to declare legally incompetent, Paul cut in. The judge held up a hand. Let her finish. Valerie turned to her final slide. In summary, we are recommending the case be escalated to the North Carolina Department of Revenue and the State Attorney's Office for formal review of tax fraud, wire fraud, and elder exploitation. Nora let out a slow breath. Her hand tightened around Emma's as she said quietly, they didn't just come for what I had. They built a system around my absence. Judge Hayes leaned forward, hands clasped. We are no longer discussing hypothetical misconduct. We are fully within criminal fraud territory. Clara's composure cracked. She turned to Derek, whispering harshly. You said no one would check. You told me it was protected under business privacy. Derek's face flushed deep crimson. You're the one who signed the filing. You used her name. I trusted you. You wanted the money. Clara stood suddenly, knocking her chair backward. The room fell silent as she clutched the edge of the table, shaking. "They're twisting it," she shouted, voice frayed. "You don't know what it was like, having to beg for help while she played perfect." "You lied about needing help," Nora said calmly. "You lied about everything." Clara's knees buckled. She collapsed to the floor with a guttural cry, her purse tumbling beside her, lip gloss and receipts scattering across the laminate tiles. Derek made no move to help her. He simply stood there, fists at his sides, watching like a man already calculating his own escape route. Judge Hayes didn't flinch. "We'll reconvene pending state review and criminal filings," he said, rising. "Until then, all accounts connected to either party are to be frozen immediately." Clara sobbed into her palms. Nora rose with grace, the room spinning slightly, but she held steady. Outside, her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "You missed one account. Check the 2017 filings. Your name's on it." And it wasn't just Derek. The indictments came 2 weeks later, delivered not with spectacle, but with the weight of inevitability. Nora read the headline on her tablet before dawn, sunlight just beginning to break over the trees outside her window. Buncombe couple indicted for fraud, elder exploitation, DA files charges in multi-year scheme involving fake LLCs, forged signatures. She scrolled slowly. Clara's mugshot looked nothing like her daughter. The pride was gone. The posture collapsed. Derek's was worse. Eyes narrowed, lips pressed tight. A man cornered by consequences he thought would never arrive. Ruth stood behind her, pouring the morning coffee. "You'd think it would feel like justice," she murmured, "but it just feels heavy." "It is," Nora replied. "Justice always is." Later that day, the subpoena came. She opened it without ceremony. A court order, signed and sealed, requiring her presence as a primary witness for the state of North Carolina. She was to testify in the first of several hearings involving charges of tax fraud, wire fraud, document forgery, and financial exploitation of a protected adult. Emma found her sitting on the porch with the letter in her lap. "You okay?" she asked softly. Nora didn't look up right away. "I think I am." Emma sank into the chair beside her, her voice quieter than usual. "You're winning, Grandma." Nora finally turned to her, her expression unreadable. "It's not about winning," she said. "It's about ending." They sat like that for a while, the mountain breeze threading through the railings, the world strangely still after so many weeks of chaos. Then Nora folded the subpoena and tucked it into her purse. "I want to walk in there on my own 2 feet. Clear mind, clear heart. Nothing more." Ruth, true to form, never left her side after that. She walked beside Nora to every preliminary hearing, heels clicking against courthouse tiles like war drums. She never sat more than a chair away, always alert, always ready. Emma, too, became a fixture in the courtroom pews. She sat through every hearing with her laptop open, tracking every filing, every court update, every whisper online that tried to twist the narrative in Clara's favor. But there were fewer of those now. The public was starting to see the truth. What began as whispers, the kind that lived behind grocery store shelves or in half-hearted church hugs, was shifting. "She doesn't look confused at all. I heard Clara took out loans in her mother's name. Emma's been caring for her this whole time, not the daughter. I always thought something about Derek's business smelled funny." Nora didn't respond to any of it. She didn't need to. She walked through each courtroom with quiet authority, nodding to the bailiff, greeting the court clerk by name. She wore the same 3 blouses, kept her testimony measured, and never once looked toward Clara unless asked to identify her. And when she did, she said it plainly. "That's my daughter, Clara Whitfield. Never my poor daughter. Never my misunderstood daughter. Just the facts." At the 3rd hearing, Nora was called to the stand again. She took the oath, adjusted her glasses, and spoke with the clarity of someone who'd learned to name her pain without letting it own her. When the prosecutor asked her what Clara had taken from her, she didn't hesitate. "Time," Nora said. "She took time I could have spent living in peace, but I won't let her take what's left." In the hallway afterward, reporters stood further back than they had before. They didn't crowd her. They didn't shout questions. They simply recorded, quietly, because the tone had changed. Ruth leaned in, looping her arm through Nora's as they stepped outside. "I think the tide's turning." "No," Nora said. "The tide already turned. They just weren't looking when it did." Back home, Nora poured herself a glass of water and sat at her desk. She opened a folder labeled 2017 filing, the one flagged by that anonymous message. Inside, her breath caught. There it was. A business registration with her name, her social security number, and an unfamiliar signature filed in electronic ink. But the name listed next to Derek's wasn't Clara. It was someone else. Someone Nora had once trusted to protect her. The sound of steel chains clinking against metal echoed through the neighborhood like a warning bell. Two sheriff's deputies stood beside a rollback tow truck in Derek Whitfield's driveway, arms crossed, clipboard in hand. One nodded toward the garage. The other turned the key to unlock it, revealing a neatly arranged arsenal of power tools, ladders, compressors, and 3 heavy-duty trucks, each bearing his business logo, all marked for seizure. From her car, parked just up the road, Emma recorded discreetly through the windshield. Ruth sat beside her, silent but pleased. Across the street, a neighbor peeked from behind their curtains. "Third truck," Emma whispered, zooming in. That one was registered under the fake LLC. Ruth sipped from her coffee. "That one's going to evidence lockup." A deputy emerged from the garage holding a file box labeled Invoices, Clients, Paid. He handed it to another officer without ceremony. No one resisted. No one needed to. Derek wasn't home. He hadn't been seen in 3 days. By noon, the trucks were gone. The driveway looked naked, stripped of its false enterprise. But that was only the first blow. 3 days later, Clara's house appeared on a foreclosure auction, public, statewide, and humiliating. The home she once paraded through with her phone on selfie mode, boasting about imported backsplash and bespoke flooring, now bore a yellow sticker on the front window. Notice of sale pending, by order of Buncombe County Circuit Court. It spread online within hours, not because of the sticker, but because someone recognized the address and posted it in a local real estate Facebook group with the caption, "Don't you love karma in 2-story brick?" Nora didn't react when she saw it. She simply closed her laptop and walked out onto the courthouse steps, where a small crowd had begun to gather for the afternoon proceedings. She stood at the top of the marble stairs, stone still, wind moving the edge of her blazer, her expression unreadable. Not cold, not triumphant, just quiet, watching. Emma appeared beside her, tucking her phone away. She looked down toward the courthouse parking lot where news vans idled and half the town seemed to whisper behind cupped hands. "You didn't just cut her off?" Emma said. "You exposed her? That's different." Nora's eyes didn't leave the horizon. She wrote her own ending. I just turned the page. Paul joined them a moment later, court files tucked under his arm, his tie slightly askew. "The trust is sealed," he said. "All legal avenues for reversal are closed. No challenge, no claim. They can't touch a dime now." "Good," Ruth said, appearing behind them with coffee for each, because if either of them could still get their hands on that money, this whole mess would start over in a week. Paul nodded. "It's over." But it wasn't. Not entirely. Because as the crowd began to disperse, a rusted gray sedan pulled up to the side curb. The driver's door opened slowly, and Clara stepped out. Not in her courtroom blazer, not in makeup or heels, just a sweatshirt, worn jeans, and eyes too wide. She looked thinner, not gaunt, but deflated, as if her life had been vacuumed out of her through a straw of her own making. She didn't walk up the stairs. She didn't yell. She waited. Nora turned toward her eventually, as if she'd felt her presence more than seen her. For a long time, neither of them moved. Then Clara took one slow step forward. "I just need 5 minutes," she said, her voice raw. Ruth moved to intervene, but Nora raised her hand gently. Clara looked up, eyes rimmed red. "I don't want money, I swear, She swallowed hard. "I don't know who I am anymore." Nora's voice was soft. "You chose who you are. I made mistakes. You made decisions." Clara's lips trembled. "I miss my mother." Nora didn't blink. "Then you should have protected her." The silence that followed was neither cruel nor forgiving. It was final. Clara lowered her gaze and turned back toward her car. She opened the door, then paused. "I didn't file the LLC alone," she said, without turning. "Check the notary stamp." And then she drove off. The courtroom was packed, not with reporters, not with gawkers, with neighbors, teachers, church members, the mail carrier who'd known Nora for 20 years, the woman from the bakery who once helped Clara carry a cake to her car, and never got a thank you. People who hadn't come to witness revenge, they'd come to witness truth. Clara and Derek sat side by side at the defense table, wrists tight in their laps. No hand-holding, no whispering. Whatever alliance they'd clung to had evaporated somewhere between the audits and the subpoenas. Judge Hayes entered, robe crisp, gavel untouched. His presence brought with it a stillness that made every cough sound like a cannon. We are here today for final sentencing in the matter of People versus Clara Whitfield and Derek Whitfield, he said, voice calm but iron-edged. Both defendants have entered plea agreements, waiving their right to trial. My ruling today is binding and final. Clara stared down at the table. Derek stared at the clock. Hayes looked directly at them. This court finds the following. Ms. Whitfield, you are guilty of elder exploitation, falsifying legal documents, and financial fraud. You are hereby sentenced to 5 years supervised probation, 1,200 hours of mandated community service, and full restitution of $147,000 to the estate of Nora Whitfield. You are permanently barred from serving as a fiduciary, caretaker, or trustee in any legal capacity for the remainder of your life. A few gasps rippled from the gallery. Clara didn't cry, but she flinched, visibly, when the words "remainder of your life" landed. The judge turned. Mr. Whitfield. Derek sat up straighter. Your crimes include wire fraud, tax evasion, and document forgery. You are fined $82,000, payable within 90 days or subject to seizure of remaining assets. Your business license is revoked, and all affiliated LLCs will be dissolved under state supervision. Hayes closed the folder with a quiet snap. Now, he said, if Mrs. Whitfield would like to speak, the court will hear her. Nora rose. She didn't need help. Her steps were slow but deliberate. She wore no jewelry, no bright color, just a gray suit and the certainty of a woman who had weathered the storm and lived to name it. Standing before the court, her voice was soft, but carried. I raised her, Nora said, nodding toward Clara without venom, with hands that fed her. I sacrificed. I stitched clothes. I took on second shifts. I drove carpools on an hour of sleep. I didn't do it for thanks. I did it because I was her mother. She paused, letting that hang. She grew up, and when I needed her, she didn't just turn away. She buried me before I'd gone. She hid the hands that healed me. She gambled my death and called it paperwork. The courtroom was silent. Emma, from her seat behind the railing, felt her chest tighten. Then Nora glanced her way, briefly, and something between them passed like a tether being tied. She thought I was her future, Nora finished. Turns out I was just the mirror she couldn't stand to look into. The jury, now dismissed but seated out of respect, sat frozen. One woman stared at Clara with an expression that could have sliced granite. Judge Hayes nodded once. Thank you, Mrs. Whitfield. This court thanks you for your clarity, your restraint, and your dignity. Nora returned to her seat. Emma reached over and clasped her shoulder. Pride wasn't a big word, but in that moment, it filled the room like music. After court adjourned, the hallway swelled with quiet congratulation. People stopped Emma to shake her hand. Ruth nodded respectfully at strangers who'd once watched them with doubt. But upstairs, in the small office Paul had borrowed from the clerk, Nora signed something far more permanent than a court transcript, an irrevocable trust agreement. Emma sat beside her, watching in stunned silence as Paul slid the final page across. You're sure? He asked. I am. She signed, then turned to Emma. You are now the sole beneficiary, Nora said. This house, the accounts, and a scholarship fund for local kids. Anyone who's lived through the kinds of silences we survived should know someone saw them. Emma blinked. You're building something. Nora smiled faintly. I'm finishing something. Before Paul could file the papers, Nora added a handwritten note to the back page. Then she folded it closed and stood tall. Downstairs, someone knocked. Urgently. Ruth opened the door. A courier stood with a sealed envelope. To Nora Whitfield, from an anonymous sender. Inside, one single sheet of paper, a copy of a 2017 notary log, and next to Clara and Derek's signatures, a third name, one the story had not yet confronted, and would. The ground was soft that morning, rich with rain, forgiving to the shovel. Nora knelt slowly, one knee on the padded cushion Ruth had insisted on, while Emma held the lavender seedlings just right, delicate but not fragile. They'd cleared a strip along the back fence. Nothing ambitious, just soil, sun, and time. Nora dug steadily. Emma followed, planting. Together they moved in rhythm, quiet, gentle, a choreography neither of them had needed to rehearse. "You always wanted a garden," Emma said, tucking one of the roots in deeper. "I always wanted time to want one," Nora replied. She wiped her forehead with the sleeve of her shirt. The spring breeze carried the scent of damp earth and honeysuckle. From inside, Ruth's radio played jazz just loud enough to float through the open kitchen window. The trust papers had been sealed. The scholarships announced. The first thank you card came that morning, hand-delivered by a high school junior named Ellie, whose parents had both been out of work since November. "She said she wants to study nursing," Emma told her earlier. "Says she wants to be someone who knows what it means to show up." Her words. Nora didn't cry, but something in her posture had softened ever since. By mid-morning, 3 more letters had arrived. One from the library board, another from a retired teacher who remembered Clara from middle school. One was simply typed on printer paper with no name, just a message. "Some of us saw the whole thing, and now we finally believe in you." Nora stood to stretch her back. Ruth emerged from the kitchen carrying 2 lemonades and a smug smile. She handed one glass to Nora, the other to Emma, then plopped herself onto the porch steps with a satisfied grunt. "Cheaper if you're gone," she muttered, swirling the ice in her cup. "Look how expensive you became instead." Nora laughed, a real laugh, deep in the chest, the kind that startled even her, because it had been so long since her body remembered how. Ruth grinned. "There she is." Emma raised her glass. 2 expensive grandmas. They clinked in the garden light. Later that afternoon, an envelope arrived from the university. The return address read, "Bursar's Office, Financial Aid Division." Emma didn't open it right away. She held it with reverence, like the last page of a book she wasn't sure she was ready to finish. When she finally did, she read it twice, then once more, just to be sure. Accepted. Full tuition covered. Aid locked in. Finance program entry approved. She didn't cry either. She just walked outside and handed the letter to Nora. Nora read it in silence, then folded it, pressing it gently into Emma's hand. "You did that," Emma whispered. "No," Nora said. "You did." Behind them, the garden was already taking root. Nothing spectacular yet, just hints of green against the soil. But the air smelled like promise. Down the street, life continued. Derek's old garage stood empty, the signage stripped, the trucks repossessed. His name had been removed from the town's contractor directory. No one had seen him in weeks. Clara's house, now listed under a holding company, sat with shutters drawn. Word was she'd left town. No forwarding address, just a bank lockout and a pile of unpaid HOA fees. But Nora didn't gloat. She just sat on the porch swing as dusk approached, watching Emma reread her letter, watching Ruth hum along to the radio, watching peace arrive not like a grand finale, but like a slow exhale. Then her phone buzzed. A single text. No name, just a number. "You saw the notary log. You know the third name. You ready to finish this?" Nora stared at it for a long time. Then, with deliberate calm, she opened her desk drawer and pulled out the envelope she'd hidden after the sentence, the one that bore the notary stamp, and the third name beside Clara and Derek's. Someone she hadn't spoken to in nearly a decade. Someone whose betrayal hadn't been loud, but had been foundational. She turned to Ruth and Emma. "Lock the house," Nora said quietly. "We're not quite done." The letter arrived without a return address. Nora found it in the mailbox beneath a grocery flyer and a folded newsletter from the local Rotary Club. The envelope was thin, hand-addressed, postmarked 3 towns over. The handwriting was unmistakable. She didn't open it right away. Instead, she placed it on the kitchen table beside her cup of chamomile, poured the water, let it steep, and watched the steam swirl like thought refusing to settle. Only after the tea turned warm did she slit the envelope open with a butter knife and slide the page free. It was short. No apologies. Not exactly. Just Clara's voice, thinner now, ink slanting like a woman trying to sound strong but slipping. "I've been staying in a motel off Route 8. Don't worry, I'm not asking for help. Just writing this because the silence is heavier than I thought. I know I broke things. I know I can't fix them. I don't expect to be forgiven. But I hope one day you'll remember that I was yours once, that I was little, and you braided my hair and sang me through storms. That version of me existed. even if I buried her. There was no return signature. Nora read it once, then again. And then she folded it, walked to her office, opened the bottom drawer of her file cabinet, and pulled out a heavy-bound ledger with worn edges and a label written in black ink. Closed accounts. She placed the letter inside, smoothed the pages, shut, and returned the book to its place. No commentary, no hesitation. Some debts, she had learned, weren't owed by both sides. That evening, dinner was simple. Roasted chicken, green beans, cornbread still warm from the oven. Ruth poured iced tea with lemon slices floating like lazy boats. Emma set the table, humming off-key to a Motown record playing softly in the background. The three of them ate outside, dusk just beginning to settle, fireflies blinking in the bushes like sparks that hadn't yet found their flame. There was no tension, no silence that begged to be filled, just the soft rhythm of forks, of laughter, of years reclaimed in small domestic peace. On the table between them, a single candle flickered, not ceremonial, not symbolic, just light, steady, and alive. After the dishes were cleared and the pie was cooling, Emma leaned back in her chair, eyes on the candle's glow. "You know," she said, voice low but sure, "you taught me something better than strategy or law." Nora raised an eyebrow. "And what's that?" Emma smiled. "That integrity is interest that compounds." Ruth let out a soft chuckle. "Amen to that." Nora looked from one to the other, her chosen family, her rescued peace, and felt no pull to the past, no ache, only a settled kind of presence, like the room had stopped echoing. She took a sip of her tea, warm and familiar. "I like that," she said. "You should write that down somewhere." Emma nodded. "I already did. In your scholarship essay form, under What My Grandmother Taught Me." Nora smiled. A real one, not stretched or forced, just effortless, earned. They sat there for a while longer, watching the sky shift from lavender to navy, the candle's flame holding steady in the breeze. Tomorrow, she'd sign the final transfer to the foundation board. Tomorrow, the scholarship would be named. Tomorrow, another envelope might arrive. But not tonight. Tonight was quiet, and safe, and whole. As they rose to go inside, Nora paused at the door, looking once more at the garden, at the porch swing, at the candle still glowing behind her on the table. Clara had tried to reduce her down to numbers, to cost, to risk, to liability. But Nora had redrawn the math. She turned to Emma and Ruth, her voice low but unmistakably clear. "She tried to cheapen my life. I made hers the most expensive lesson she'll ever learn.